It is the end of the day. The first one and the third one, the walleye spawning operations and gizzard shad trap and transfer, those are just going to be really quick updates from this last spring, what we've been moving around. But I really wanted to focus on the walleye tagging study because it is a very big project that we're undertaking as far as the fisheries side of division goes. Lake Oahe walleye spawn this year. You know, you heard Keith talk about the really late winter we had. You know, started off the winter, it looked like it was going to be a fairly mild winter, and it just drug on and drug on and drug on. And, you know, that undoubtedly, you know, affected how the walleye spawn went, especially the egg take operations, and that's what I'm going to talk about quite a bit on Lake Oahe. Historically, Lake Oahe is, you know, one of the main lakes that we take the majority of our eggs from to stock within the state. You know, the eggs are fertilized, they're sent to the state hatcheries, hatched out, grown up, and stocked all over the state. And again, Lake Oahe at times can be a great lake to take the eggs from the walleyes. There's been years when we can take the entire, you know, the entire budget, egg budget for the state in just a number of days on Lake Oahe, just because we have the number of big fish, good females, good hatch success, and everything. This year was not the case, though, on Lake Oahe. Again, part of that comes from, you know, either the late winter, the weather, or the size structure of the fish, but I'll get to that here in a second. Just fell short of our egg quota, what we wanted for the number of eggs. We ended up getting 60.6 million eggs, and that's from statewide too. Again, I'll show you the numbers for Lake Oahe here in just a second, but Northeast and Southeast South Dakota, you know, they really pulled through and came up with some big numbers of eggs this year, which is really good. But again, for this talk, I'll just kind of focus on Lake Oahe. From Lake Oahe only, we had 13.8 million eggs, which sounds like a lot of eggs, but then you compare it to even 2012, which was a lower year. We had 35.7 million eggs out of the Grand River and 30.8 million eggs from the Moreau River. So if you would have looked at the egg take last year, we could have filled our, you know, our requirements just from Lake Oahe, which is normal. And last year was, you know, kind of a low year too. So, you know, when you're looking at that, you know, it's more anecdotal evidence to suggest, you know, maybe our size structure isn't there. You know, we look at it and we try to see, you know, why this happened, why was the egg take so much lower. You know, weather probably played a little bit into it. You know, we were late getting out there. When you looked at the lake, you know, we had ice in the center of the lake. The edges started to thaw right away, so, you know, there could have been fish that were spawning before we could get out there while there was still ice on the water. But really what we saw was this change in size structure, and it's what we talked about last fall, is that, you know, the number of the big fish just weren't there this year. You know, the number of 19, 20-inch fish and above, you know, we weren't catching the numbers of those large fish. Some of the bigger fish too, you know, the egg numbers seem to be down. You know, a lot of those fish, they are either spent or never produced eggs from the beginning. So, you know, and it's kind of what we predicted last year. We knew that, you know, the larger fish would be hit a little bit harder from the loss in the rainbow smelt. We did, you know, it appears that we did lose quite a few of those larger fish through the wintertime, through this spring. And the big question is, you know, where do we go? You know, Lake Oahe is historically, you know, one of the best places for us to get our walleye eggs from. Again, this last year, the eastern part of the state did a great job getting, you know, supplying enough eggs for us, and, you know, we'll definitely look to them in the future. But with our size structure so much different on Lake Oahe than it's been in past years, you know, what are we going to focus our efforts at? And I'll just say that we're currently, you know, talking about exploring other options, whether they're on other Missouri rivers or western lakes, eastern lakes. You know, we're going to look around, and I think what the plan is to look at the size structure of all of our different lakes next year, and, you know, whatever populations have size structure that would be very conducive to getting some large females that are ripe and taking the eggs from those females. That's where we'll end up going. But again, you know, to sum up, you know, we did meet our goal, just came underneath our goal. Really, hard work from the eastern part of the state. Those guys were doing really well. They were out there a lot of days pulling in a lot of eggs. And they produced a lot of eggs this year. Lake Oahe, the size structure just isn't there. A lot of small fish. We were taking eggs off of, 15, maybe not quite 15, but 16, 17-inch fish. Smaller fish is what I'm saying. A lot smaller fish than we normally take eggs from. And then for future years, we're just going to, explore other options, see where else we can go and try to get eggs for our statewide quota. And that's all I had for the walleye spawning efforts. Do you have any questions?
You going to speak to anything that we know about the snow?
I can at the end, yep. All right, now this is the big one. This is the biggest project that we have going on out of our office, and that's for sure, and that's the Lake Oahe walleye tagging study. And before I get started, I have to acknowledge or actually just highlight the cooperation that's going on between us, SDSU, and North Dakota Game and Fish. This is really the first time that we're looking at this system as Lake Oahe, as one lake. No borders there. We've done some tagging studies in the past, we've done creel in the past, but it's always either on the south side of the border or the north side of the border. And you always lose a little bit when you have a black box, on one side of the state and you don't know what's going on in that side. So about a year ago, we started having conversations with North Dakota Game and Fish. We have a good relationship with them, and we just started posing the questions on what's going on with our walleye as far as movement, exploitation, how many of those fish are being pulled out on both sides of the border. And we started these conversations, and both sides of the state got really excited about it. All the biologists did, and we really worked together. We put together the proposal together, and this spring we actually started tagging the fish, and everything's been going very smoothly. And so again, I really want to acknowledge, really highlight that cooperation we have with North Dakota Game and Fish. Now, like I said, when we first started talking about a year ago, we had some very important questions, and we posed them to each other, and we gave our interpretation of the answers. But the bottom line comes down to we have some very important questions that we need to ask. One of them is, what is our annual exploitation? And this is the percentage of the population that's removed every year. We know what our creel is. We know how many fish we're harvesting. We have an estimate of that from our creel. But is that 20% of the population, or is that 50% of the population? And when you look at population dynamics, that number, when that number changes, that can really affect the population and future populations. Annual mortality, this is another question, especially in years where we have smelt crashes, when we have, low numbers of prey out there, what is our natural mortality? Fish is like any other, animal. There's fish out there dying every day. Right now, there's probably a lot more larger fish dying than there was 5 years ago, again, because of the prey fish shortage. So over the next 4 or 5 years, we want to start looking at what is our natural mortality. How many of those, and, size specific, gender specific. Are all our big females having higher mortality than our males? Or is it just strictly size based? Big question that we have, and this is kind of what fostered a lot of these discussions, is fish movement. In 2009 we saw fishing. 2009 through 2011 we saw fishing that was phenomenal in North Dakota, and a lot of anglers, from South Dakota were upset, thinking that our fish had moved up into North Dakota, and they have different regulations than we do, and again that fostered a lot of discussion. A lot of people were coming in asking us about it, and when I talked to our counterparts in North Dakota, they were getting the same thing. So this idea of fish movement is huge. How much movement is there between the South Dakota and North Dakota border? Are these fish fairly sedentary? They just kind of hang out, or do they go on these pretty big migrations, especially spawning migrations is what a lot of people were talking about. But I would say of all the questions, this is what anglers are always interested in. Where are these fish moving? Where do they go? And finally, it comes up to, a single number. That's what a lot of people want, and that's what is our walleye population? How many fish are out there? It's hard to conceive, when you harvest 1.2 million fish over the last 2 years, how many fish are actually out in that system? And so when you start talking about exploitation and mortality, you know, you put it all together and you can come up with some really good models to model how our regulations are affecting the population. And that's essentially our end goal. You know, once we get our population estimate, figure out exploitation, mortality, we'll start looking at the regulations both by South Dakota Game Fish and Parks and by North Dakota Game and Fish, and start looking at how these regulations affect the current walleye population. The great thing about having this information too is that we can start looking at some of our past regulations and even future regulations. You know, once we have this information, we can start coming up with computer models to you know, if we wanted to try a different experimental regulation, or if we see another prey crash in the future, is there a better regulation that we can come up with compared to what we're doing currently? So it's, you know, it's just data acquisition so that we know these, you know, these little tidbits of information so that we can model what happens in the future. You know, that's a lot of what we do, is trying to prepare for the future. So this is going to be the tough part, actually. You know, the modeling, computer scenarios, coming up with exploitation, that's the tough part. This spring we got out there and we hit it hard, and the tagging's actually gone very simply. It was a good year for tagging. North Dakota got out first. They were ice-free right away, especially in that tail race, that moving water. So they started putting tags in beginning of April. And then we followed up as soon as our ice lifted. We're using monojaw tags, which is a metal jaw tag, and they're either placed on the top or the bottom jaw, and it depends on fish size. Smaller fish will have a tag on the bottom, larger fish will have the tag on the top.